Hi there. Well, today we're going to cover the basics of RESPs and just really look at how do RESPs work anyway. And we'll cover the crucial question of whether you should get a family or an individual RESP plan. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back. Well, before we get too far into the mechanics of how an RESP works, I want to first talk about some basic terminology with you. Well, first and foremost, what does RESP mean? Well, RESP simply means Registered Education Savings Plan. Okay, that's what it means. And then within the RESP, there's two really important terms that you need to understand because it's used throughout these videos and it's used throughout the literature that's out there on the internet and on the Canadian Revenue Agency website. Okay, and those two terms are first, subscriber. The subscriber is essentially the person who owns and who opens the RESP. Okay, and that's likely going to be you, right, for your child. So you're the one who opens it up. You're probably the one who's going to make contributions into it, and you're likely going to be the subscriber, and your spouse might be the co-subscriber. Okay. Now the second term that's really important to know is the beneficiary. Now, what's the beneficiary? You probably guessed it. It's probably going to be your child, right? It's the person for whom you open up the RESP for. So basically, that person there is the beneficiary of the plan. They're the person. That's the person or persons who are going to use the money when they go to their post-secondary education. Okay, so remember those terms: subscriber, beneficiary. Okay, those are really important terms. All right, let's talk about the basics of how an RESP works. Okay, so first off, we have the subscriber. Now, the subscriber is a person, probably yourself, who opens up the RESP account and who makes contributions. Now, basically, those contributions go into the RESP plan. And a couple of key points to note here is that number one, those contributions are made with after-tax money. There are no tax deductions that are given for making contributions into an RESP. So unlike an RRSP, where you do receive tax deduction when you make those contributions with your money, in RESP there are no tax deductions that occur there. Okay, and lastly, there is also a $50,000 lifelong contribution limit per beneficiary that occurs here. Okay, so you are limited. You cannot contribute more than $50,000 per beneficiary into the RESP. Okay, so now that's on your side. We also have the government coming in and putting in grants. Okay, some of the grants are based on your contribution levels, and other grants are based simply on your household income level. Now, I've got a whole separate video that talks about grants, how much grants the government will give you, and how you can maximize your grants and potentially even get grants for free. Okay, so that's a separate video. Take a look and keep an eye out for that one. Now, when the money goes into the RESP, if we're talking about an individual or a family RESP, the subscriber is responsible for the investment portfolio. So you would have that responsibility to choose which funds to grow your child's education plan with. Now, that being said, it is your responsibility to create the investment portfolio for that, but you can also utilize the services of a financial advisor, such as myself, to help you put together a good, solid portfolio for your child. All right. And next, about the money in the RESP, as it grows, as a typical investment will grow, you're going to have some interest, you're going to have some dividends, and you'll also get some capital gains. But as that money grows, it actually grows tax deferred, meaning that you don't pay tax on that money, on that growth, as it's growing. As long as the money stays into the RESP, there are no taxes to be paid. Okay, that's important to know. Now, finally, in the end, when your child wants to use the money for his or her post-secondary education, they'll pull out the money through what we call an education assistance payments. And again, I'll talk about I have a whole video dedicated to this one as well. But fundamentally, the important thing to note here is that the RSP growth and the grant dollars are taxable to the beneficiary. Meaning that if all else is equal and your child pulls out the money from the RESPs, you as the subscriber do not have to pay any taxes. It is your child's responsibility for the taxes. And as I show in a different video, there is actually a way to plan things out such that your child may not even have to pay any taxes whatsoever. Okay, so those are that's the basic mechanisms around how an RESP works. All right, now let's talk about the different types of RESPs that we can have here. Let's start off with individual RESPs. Now, if you form an individual RESP, now that's basically, as the title suggests, is that you have an individual beneficiary. It's for one person, okay? So you can create an RESP for your child, but there's actually very few limits on who can actually be the subscriber or the beneficiary here. The subscriber can be anybody with a social insurance number, meaning that anybody else could create, put in place an RESP and name your child as the beneficiary. As long as they know the social insurance number of your child, they can do that potentially. And so you have sometimes situations where grandparents or aunts and uncles that are creating RESPs, individual RESPs for their grandchildren or their nieces and nephews, or even for people with non-familiar relationships at all. Maybe it's a friend and you'd like to help out with their child's education. Okay, so an individual RESP is useful for that. Now, again, beneficiary, as long as the beneficiary is a resident or a citizen and has a social insurance number, then they qualify as a beneficiary. Pretty much as simple as that. One of the misnomers about a individual RESP is that some people think that an individual RESP is stuck to that individual, that you can't move it. And that's not true. You can actually change the beneficiary from one person to the next, and there's very few restrictions about that. Again, as long as the other beneficiary has a social insurance number, you can make that change. Now, the only gotcha with that is with regards to the grant money. So if grant money was given to a beneficiary, it can only be moved to another beneficiary if two conditions are met. Number one, the other beneficiary has enough grant room available, and I'll talk about what grant room is in a different video. Secondly, is that the two beneficiaries need to be related as brother and sister, either by blood or by adoption. As long as the subscriber is the subscriber is the father or the mother by blood or by adoption for both of them, then you can move the grant money from one to the other, as long as the receiving beneficiary has the grant room capacity for receiving that. So that's an important thing to know about individual RESPs. Okay? And lastly, in individual RESPs, so if you get several individual RESP accounts, you can actually combine them together to form a family RESP account, a single family RESP account. Now, that being said, well, what is a family RESP account? Well, essentially, as its title suggests, it's a single RESP for multiple beneficiaries that are your children, that are all siblings together, either by blood or by adoption, and they all share you as a parent, again, by blood or adoption. All right. Both parents can open up a family RESPs. Both parents can be considered co-subscribers to a family RESP. And generally speaking, there's less paperwork involved, especially if you're growing a family. You've got 2 children, it's growing to 3. Adding a third beneficiary into the plan is simply just filling in a single page of paperwork and sending it off to the bank. And there's also potential fee savings as well. So instead of maintaining 2 or 3 or 4 accounts, you're only maintaining 1 account. So you could see some savings there. Okay. And again, with a family account, you're free to assign. All the beneficiaries can access any of the money in the family RESPs, with the exception of the grant money. So again, there's particular rules around who can access the grant money. So the principal that's invested, anybody can use it. The growth that would have occurred from either the principal or the grant, any child can use that money that's registered as a beneficiary. But as long as they're in school, of course, in a registered post-secondary education institution. But the grant money has to be carefully managed. If one child does not use all the grant money, it can be moved to another beneficiary within the plan. But again, the receiving beneficiary needs to have the grant room available. And I'll talk about what that means in a separate video. Okay, so there's more flexibility with the family RESP. Now, there's also one more important thing to consider with a family RESP. One particular rule to keep in mind is that from the point where the RESP is opened, you can make contributions into that RESP until one beneficiary turns 31 years of age. Okay, so when one beneficiary turns 31 years of age, that's when you can no longer make any contributions into that family RESP. So if you have children that have wide age gaps, like let's say you have a child that's 15 years old and you have another child that's 2 or 3 years old, it may not be the wisest thing to have one single family RESP that will span the two of them, because the older child may not, will hit 31 before the other child goes to school. So that's going to be a bit of a problem, and you'll be limited in how you can contribute into your RESP for your younger children. Okay, that's number one. Number two, well, the investment portfolio as well will be a little bit tricky to manage too, because part of the investment will be for the older child. Well, you want to probably have a conservative investment portfolio for the older child because you want to make sure the money's there. The time horizon's short. You want to make sure that the money is there when they go to school. And for the younger child, well, there's time there for their funds to grow. So you probably want to pick a more aggressive investment portfolio for your younger child. So there might be some value in going with an individual RESP approach for two children that are that have a big age gap between them. Okay, so that's another important thing to consider here. All right, well, that's all we have to say about basic RESPs. Now, next we've got 4 videos that you should check out. Number 1, if you're considering getting a group RESP or a scholarship trust, I have one video that's covering those, and those go through and give you 6 key questions that you need to get answers to if you're considering buying a group RESP or a scholarship trust. Next, we have a whole video about grants. All the grants you want to learn about and how you can maximize them and potentially you can get them without even spending a dime. Thirdly, we have a video about how your children can take the money out of an RESP and how we can basically arrange that such that they don't have to pay a lick of tax or minimize the amount of tax that they would have to pay. And lastly, well, I hate to say it, but what if your child doesn't go to school? Right? That could happen. Life happens. What happens to the RESP then? We had a whole video that covers that. Again, very pithy, but it'll get you all the information that you need to have in order to make an informed decision here. All right. With that, I'm signing off today. Have a good day and keep putting that knowledge into action. All right. Take care.